run down like clocks. One day they stop, and that's all they've got. And some people's lives wear out like tennis shoes. No one can use. Well, it's sad, but it's true. Doesn't anybody tell them? Doesn't
process that for a while, then get up here and yak. I want to say to you, Cameron, I have like not one codependent bone in my body. And while you were singing that song, I just wanted to walk around the room and get eye to eye to people, with people, and just say, I care. You know? Years ago, my friend Reverend Aaron wrote a song called Everybody's Got a Story to Tell. And we all indeed do. And there are so many of us that are just looking for that, somebody that cares. Let me just pull myself together here for a moment. Forgiveness. It's a deep topic. Hi, Linda. It's a deep topic that we felt deserved an extra week. And one congregant said to me this morning, could we just cover this through the rest of the year? And another congregant told me about their experience of forgiveness this week. It really is a great topic linking with our power of, some people call it release, some people call it elimination, some people call it renunciation. That's actually what co-founder Charles Fillmore called it. Do you remember our 3 definitions that we talked about last week? I almost said last month. It was last month, wasn't it? I'm so on the ball today. Our 3 definitions: forgiveness is giving love for hate. Forgiveness is giving up my right to be a victim. Forgiveness is, where's Paul? Giving up my need, my attachment to having a perfect past. Can you relate with any of those definitions? On all sorts of levels, forgiveness is an element of prosperity that has to do with debt. Remember we talked about that simple little prayer that has the line in it, forgive us our debts. Forgive us our debts. And the action step, as we also forgive our debtors. Notice the circulation there. Notice the give and receive. Notice the release and receive. For those of us that have actually asked someone for forgiveness, you can identify with the idea that it can feel pretty vulnerable to be in that space. And then for others, can slip off the tongue so easily, unconsciously, like a habit, not necessarily asking for forgiveness. It's more of a, I apologize for my whole self. Then there's this piece about self-forgiveness. I shared a story last week about a conversation that I had with someone about a regret. I'm going to guess 6 or 7 decades ago, at least 6 decades ago. And still just so immersed in the heartache of that decision. Would we agree that self-forgiveness might be our toughest one on the menu? Anybody do that real easily? What is actually at the core of forgiveness? Forgiving ourselves, forgiving another, being forgiven. I think what's actually at the core is our innate desire to be whole. To be whole, mind, body, spirit. Because we talked last week, in actuality, forgiveness has very little to do with the other person, yes? And someone in our discussion group last week reiterated that. It sounds a little callous, but the bottom line is we don't forgive or ask for forgiveness for their benefit. We do it because it's our heart that yearns to be cleansed. Now, is there anyone in the room or out there in live stream land, that vast invisible ether space, is there anyone that's had any experience with withholding forgiveness? Wow. Clearly someone else should be up here sharing this message. Not one hand went up. But, You know, we talked about this last week. As long as we're harboring that unforgiveness, we are holding in resentment, which includes hurt, blame for sure, loathing, anger, and pain. And that resentment goes around and around and around over and over again. Now, depending on where we are on our spiritual continuum, some of us may withhold forgiveness for days. Anybody can do it for just an hour or two? Benita? All right. Gold star for you. Free trip to Hawaii, my friend. We withhold it for our days, weeks, months. Anybody been in that painful boat? Years? And when we're withholding forgiveness, we're also holding out on our own peace of mind. We hold the other, or even ourselves, hostage on the streets of our mind. Imagine, just take a second to think about how much energy we use holding on to unforgiveness. And here's the irony of it. Every day that we're withholding forgiveness, let's say I have a thing with Amanda, and what she did was terrible, horrible, unforgivable. So I'm withholding that forgiveness, thinking that she's indebted to me. She owes me, right? She owes me that apology. The actual reality is I am indebted to Amanda. Because by withholding forgiveness, I have created a debt with her. I have created a debt with her, and we are bonded like steel. We're not even going to talk about that energy. So until we can forgive, we're drinking that vial of poison, our vengeful thoughts, our resentment. And in our discussion group last week, somebody made an important observation. They said to forgive someone doesn't mean we make an excuse for the behavior. It doesn't mean that we condone it. But I believe that at the end of the day, the real question of forgiveness is, how do I want to live? Distress? then it's okay with me if you need to hang on to that poison and take a sip every day. If that's where you need to be, that's okay. On the other hand, if I'm in a hurry for peace, then I best be dropping the poison and getting right to and through my forgiveness work. Has anybody had to go through a forgiveness process more than once with another person? You know, you roll through it and you're like, I am so spiritual and so enlightened. And then something comes back around the bend and you're like, holy cow, they changed their outfit and showed up again. What is it with them? Years ago, this woman, Reverend Jane Hart, spoke at a Great Lakes conference and did some exercises out of this book. It's called Spiritual Power Tools. And power tool number 4 is amazing in my experience. It is 7 steps of forgiveness. We made a handout that you can take with you as you leave today. And if you go to the table and there are no more handouts, please ask Ruth to create some more. She can do it in a jiffy. So I'm just going to run through these 7 steps and touch on this because the worksheet will walk you through it. It's a journaling exercise. And my experience with it, yes, I have been through the process many times with one particular situation in my life. And every time was effective because it got a little more of the wound excavated. And here's how I knew that process was complete for me. I'd been through the process, like I said, a few times, and the next time I saw this person, I felt completely neutral. I had no energy, no buzz, no sticky, she owes me, when is she going to apologize to me? That was all her fault. We know that's true, right? That was all their fault. So when we can get to neutral, in my book, that's a bonus. And then we're really on the path if we can get to the space where we can see them through the eyes of divine love. So the 7 steps that I'm just touching on, first step is gratitude. Imagine that. Second step is journaling about the good times that we had with this person. And third is writing about our unfulfilled hopes, our missed opportunities, our attachment to, this for me was a very, very powerful step, our attachment to how it should have happened. That page was really, really damp by the time I got done, as I recall. Step 4 is writing about our disappointments and our difficulties. Step 5 is forgiveness. Step 6 is review and release. And step 7 is completion. So it's a great little book now out of print. I did find it on a website, so, and I can't remember the price. I think it was ranging from like 10 to 14. So if anyone is interested in buying this book, please see Ruth and we'll get an order in for you. I also want to quote from Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, wrote this book called Prosperity, and chapter 8 is titled, God Will Pay Your Debts. I love Fillmore because he cuts right to the chase. He's very direct. Do not judge others as regards to their guilt or innocence. Consider yourself and how you stand in the sight of God for having thoughts about another's guilt. Is everybody still breathing? Begin your reform with yourself. Unity, it's not a picnic. Not an easy ride every week, is it? Begin your reform with yourself. Because after all, we are the only one that we can change. Yes? Especially for those of us who've been in relationships for more than, say, 6 or 9 months. It becomes very clear, gosh, they really are how they show up, aren't they? Like, this is a day-to-day thing. But when he stops doing XYZ, or when he starts doing XYZ, I will be at peace. The relationship will be good. I will be happy. I will be content. Speaking of holding ourselves hostage, yes? My Martha Creek, my spiritual tormentor, I call her, taught me early on that when I'm feeling judged, which hardly ever happens in my line of work, or I'm in the business of judging others, it's a great time to ask, can I find that? We go through a process every year, the Board of Trustees and I, where each person on the board gets to evaluate my performance of the previous year. And then the board gets to tell me what they think of me. Sometimes on a very personal basis, and they get to tell me on a professional level how they think I'm doing in this role. So, family systems and being criticized, Martha and I had some work to do around this exercise. And I do remember one of the very first things she taught me, I was sharing some of the critical feedback. And she's from Kentucky, so she just has a very slight drawl. And she said, well, honey, can you find that? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, have you ever been like that? I said, well, hell yes. And she said, well, then what's the problem? All someone is doing is sharing their perspective. Can we just hear it without attachment? Can we hear it without giving it some sort of meaning about them? Can I find that? It's a very valuable question because 99% of the time the answer is, oh yeah, I think that did happen. I think I was like that in that scenario. And it's also helpful because we do spend part of our day judging others, particularly in traffic, when it comes to turn signals. It is amazing the number of vehicles that were created without turn signals. So when we're in the business of judging or criticizing someone for a particular habit or behavior, it's also helpful to ask, can I find that? Have I ever been that obnoxious? Mm-hmm. So remember that question, can I find that? And along these lines of self-reform, we can notice when we're driving in someone else's lane. Anybody know what that feels like? When you suddenly realize that you are like 2-3 lanes out of your own business. So when we're driving in somebody's lane, we can use this tip from Byron Katie. Whose business is it? Oh. Is it their business? Is it truly my business? Is it God's business? More often than not, it really is their business. And I need to just signal and slide back over to my own lane. This paying mindful attention to our whole self, does anybody else think it is full-time job? Like full-time, time and a half maybe. So in regard of this idea of criticism, judging, blaming, Fillmore tells us to, quote, part company forever with an accusing conscience. Talk about freedom. I also want to share, because this is our last Sunday for right now on this topic, I want to share a few nuggets from David Owen Ritz. He's a New Thought minister, and he created a program, prosperity program, several years ago called Keys to the Kingdom, and it's one of my favorite programs. He speaks to that definition about giving up our attachment to a perfect past, and he reminds us that quite often our past is not completely in the past. He wrote that the energy of the past is still quite active in our minds as regret, judgment, guilt, shame, and resentment. Now, can anyone identify with any of those feelings? Because I would wager my firstborn and onlyborn that our bottle of poison, our own little personal bottle of poison, contains all of that. And just like our basements, our attics, I wish Bill Graham were in the room. Just like our basements, our attics, our closets, our drawers that are full of stuff that we don't use, we don't touch, we don't need. Our emotional closet is the very same way. Like, we just can't let go of it. I might want to hang on to just that little shred of resentment because she's liable to do it again. I bet she'll strike again and I'm going to be ready. I'm going to have it all warmed up. So think about that metaphor. Not that we all keep a lot of stuff in our homes that we don't need or touch, but if we did, imagine that in the physical sense, and then imagine all of that clutter in an emotional sense. And there is good news, of which I am here to assure you. Fillmore said this actually. Negative energy is always seeking healing and release. Let's just say that together. Negative energy is always seeking healing and release. Our souls are crying out for wholeness. And Ritz wrote about a few ways to think about forgiveness. A couple of them we've covered, so I'll share the other ones. Number one, to forget is not required in forgiveness work. Okay? And I've also read people that say it's absolutely required. So you can choose either of those options that work for you. Second one, forgiveness is not about denying what happened. It's not about denying how we feel, okay? It's about us working with that and processing it. Step number 3, somebody mentioned in the class last week, it's not about excusing or condoning what happened. You know how when someone apologizes to us for something, and it might be one of the more minor things, but they'll apologize for something and we'll go, that's okay. When really the better response might be, thank you for saying that. I totally accept your apology. It's okay is like, didn't happen. You're not responsible. We're not going to talk about it. Let's not go there. Get it? And 4, this is a good one. Forgiveness must be completely unconditional. Given freely with no expectation of return. That is complete freedom. And here's an interesting one that I think some of us might stumble over a little. Forgiveness does not require a full reconciliation. And with my own personal scenario that I referred to, that I did so many different paths to forgiveness, I think for the longest time I thought, well, we need to fully reconcile. We need to both talk it out, share our point of view, share what happened, and then be friends after. And the reality is that isn't always possible for a variety of reasons. And so Ritz assures us that if we are doing our true and full and unconditional forgiveness work, that reconciliation does not have to be a part of that. And reconciliation is a wonderful thing when we can walk through that and still be friends with someone, but we can forgive with or without their participation. David Owen Ritz also gave us this metaphor in class. He said, so you're driving down the street, you're stopped at a traffic light, and somebody walks by and throws this big, nasty bag of garbage in your back seat. And he's like, what do? Do you roll up your window and keep driving? Or do you stop the car and clean out the garbage? So somebody walks by knowingly or unconsciously and throws a bag of garbage into our mind. Do I lock the doors, roll up the windows, and keep barreling down the street? Or do I stop and clean out that closet? Ritz wrote that forgiveness, self-love, and true abundance are inextricably bound together. Make sense? Forgiveness, self-love, and abundance. To love ourselves completely and unconditionally, recognizing that we are physical beings in a spiritual journey, we must practice forgiveness in order to love ourselves completely and unconditionally. Our existence in the kingdom depends on our willingness to release our guilt, our shame, our blame. And the truth is, we get to decide. We get to decide if we live in the distress of withholding forgiveness. We get to decide if we're going to live in peace, in grace, in ease. It's like that song we sang earlier, "Love is my decision." I love the line in here about no one else can make me forgive. Love is my decision. It's up to me to stand on the bridge. Love is my decision. No one else can lighten my load. Have you noticed? Have you noticed no one else is lightening your load for you? That's unfortunate. So as we go into the silence this morning, I feel like we have some really delicious and juicy nuggets to digest this morning. And I just invite us as we relax into our sacred and holy place. I just remind us to bring with us that framework. I can choose. And trust me, there's no right or wrong. It doesn't take too long to forgive someone. We're ready at the very moment that we are ready to be whole. As we come to this space, we invite the activity of spirit within us, the cleansing, purifying, crystallizing presence that knows only wholeness for us, that knows only well-being, the infinite one that knows only love, only love. Peace. Be still and know that I am. No one else can lighten my load. It's up to me to dance down that road. And so it is. Remember, the handouts are out there, and if you have an interest in, I lost it, in the spiritual power tools, I'll give mine to Ruth so you can take a flip through it, and if you want to order it, let her know.
That's when you come and pour your mercy on me. Your beauty shines, your love surrounds.